Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How's it going? Today I wanted to do a video about strengths and weaknesses, but it's a little different from what you might think, okay? So a lot of times we say, well, can you identify your personal strengths or can you identify your personal weaknesses, right? This one actually kind of twists this around a little bit. It's kind of like almost a cognitive flexibility exercise where sometimes what we think is a strength can be a weakness and what we think is a weakness can be a strength. And so it kind of frees us up and prevents us from being too judgmental or forming, two opinions that are too rigid about things. Okay, so this could free you up to see yourself and other people differently. All right, so follow me here and see if you'll get what I'm talking about. So here we go. So strength or weakness or both. Okay, it's a little dialectical in that way. So I'm going to run you through a bunch of examples just so you can kind of get the idea how this works, and then take the idea and try to apply it to yourself in your own life where this might fit in for you. All right. So first one, let's say we're looking at following through with something versus quitting, right? So initially we might think, well, the strength is to follow through, persistence, right? Keep going in the face of difficulty, make sure you finish, right? And we might say, well, that's a strength, right? And a lot of times it is. Let's say we want to follow through with a task, follow through with an assignment for work or for school, follow through with treatment, right? And that could be seen as a strength, okay? Whereas sometimes we might say, well, quitting or giving up too fast can be considered a weakness, right? Come on, man, you don't give up when the going gets tough, keep going, right? But what if we saw it a different way? What if following through could be considered a problem if you're following through with something that's not right for you? So let's say you're really unhappy in the job that you're in. And is it worth it then to keep going if it's really just making you miserable? Or if you're in a relationship and the relationship isn't working out and you're trying to say, well, in your reasonable mind way, I made a vow or, I agreed to commitment. So I better just follow through and keep this going. But is that always the best idea, right? Is that a sign of strength to keep going with something that's not right for you? Okay, in that case, it actually might be a strength to follow your heart, to listen to your intuition, and make the difficult decision to quit. When quitting could be an empowering decision when it's quitting something that's not right for you, that's not in line with your values, that's not bringing you any happiness in your life. Okay, so we have to reevaluate what's really a strength, what's really a weakness. It's really based on the situation. Okay, so we can't be too rigid, like I always must follow through no matter what, right? Because there's always occasions where quitting might be the more ideal thing, right? See how this works? Okay, so let's try another one. Okay, stoic versus sensitive. So stoic kind of means like you're kind of holding back your emotions, right? You're putting on a stiff upper lip and, you're not really, letting it show, right? You're kind of keeping your feelings to yourself, tight vest, right? Sensitive might be that you're much more emotional, you're more sensitive to things, you respond much more to other people or to sentimental things, or maybe you're quicker to feel a strong emotion like anxiety or anger or shame, right? So sometimes you might say, well, being able to hold back your emotions can be seen as a strength, right? Men especially feel this way, right? I work with a lot of males at my job, and it seems as more manly to hold back on your emotions and not let it show, right? So that seems a manly strength, right? But can sensitivity also be considered a strength, right? It takes some strength to allow yourself to be vulnerable, right? To permit yourself to really feel your emotions and to tune in to them and to admit them and to let other people see you in that mode, okay? And so that in itself is a strength. Sometimes even admitting them to yourself can be a strength, right? So instead of covering over, more delicate emotions like shame or fear with things like anger, what if you really dove in and you felt them? That's an incredible strength, allowing yourself to do that, right? So another similar way to put this is avoiding emotions versus experiencing emotions. So doing everything we can to shove emotions down, we almost seem like a forceful kind of a thing, but in a way, it's like a sign that you're afraid. So in a way, it's almost like a weakness because you're scared of it, right? So experiencing emotions can look on the surface like, oh, you're such a wuss, you're falling apart. But in a way, it's actually kind of nice, right? And some of the most sensitive people make, the best partners, the best friends, the best therapists, right? Once you regulate your emotions, it can really be used to your advantage in a lot of ways, right? Okay, so let's go to the next one. Unhappy childhood versus a happy childhood. So on the surface, I'm sure it seems like, well, who would want an unhappy childhood, right? I definitely trade that in a second for a happy childhood, right? Who wouldn't? Okay. But how many people have actually taken an unhappy childhood, learned some difficult lessons, worked on themselves and all the after effects of it, and actually used it to develop a great amount of resilience? So they took what was a really challenging experience in their life and they turned it into a strength, right? There's even an archetype called the wounded healer. So some of the people that, help you in your life in terms of a therapy kind of relationship had unhappy childhoods. They realized how much they suffered, they got help, and then they turned their experience into something that they learned from that they could share with other people, right? Same kind of thing in 12-step programs. People went through terrible experiences with addiction, and now they're using it to help others. So what started out as a weakness or a problem became their greatest strength. Sometimes a happy childhood is a great thing, and it puts you on a more stable foundation for when things get, as you grow up. But at the same time, you may not have as much ability to really relate to people that are suffering because maybe you haven't had to go through really hard things, So while it seems like a strength on the surface, it can sometimes work to your disadvantage because you haven't had to overcome as much as other people. Okay, strength, weakness. Okay. Perfectionism. So perfectionism is a little different from striving for excellence. So striving for excellence is really kind of about doing the best you can. But when you're perfectionistic, you set an impossible goal to reach and you never quite get there. You're always chasing something and it never feels good enough, right? So while on the surface, it might look like it's a strength because you're trying to do really great things, beneath the surface, it might be a weakness because it's creating a lot of suffering. Because beneath this strive for excellence is this feeling that it's never going to be enough. And I'm not going to be good enough as a person until I'm more perfect, and I'm never going to be more perfect, right? Strength, weakness. Okay, so here's one that comes up if you have some anger issues, okay? So fighting versus walking away. Now, fighting for you may or may not be physical. It might be intense arguments, it might be bullying, it might be some other form. But basically we'll say fighting versus walking away. So sometimes the fighting seems like a strength, right? Because sometimes it involves actual physical strength, right? It involves speaking up for yourself, fighting for your rights, fighting for your boundaries, right? And the anger sometimes can motivate us to right or wrong, right? We can use it as a strength, okay? Instead of sitting back and being trampled on. Walking away sometimes seems like a weakness. It's like, well, why don't you just face somebody? Are you a coward because you're walking away? Are you a punk, right? So walking away could seem like the weak thing to do. But it all depends on the fight that you're fighting. Sometimes the fight is worthwhile and important, but other times it's just an emotional mind dispute that's not going to get you anywhere and just going to create more misery for you and the other person who's involved. Sometimes it could actually get you in more trouble, especially if you're, fighting with people in your family and now you have to repair a relationship, or you're fighting with people at work and now you got to backpedal and apologize, right? So depending on the situation, depends on if it's a strength or a weakness. If it's a not so productive fight, it could be a weakness and it might be better to walk away. Where I work at my hospital, if you get into a physical altercation, it could really create a lot of problems for you. You can get negative notes in your chart. You may lose your privileges. It might keep you in the hospital longer. And it's almost never really worth it. So it could actually be a weakness to give into your impulses and fight with somebody rather than have the strength to walk away and know when it's not worth it. Okay, so you really got to use your wise mind to decide when's it worth fighting and when's it worth walking away. Okay, so here's another one, conforming versus rebelling. All right, so conforming might seem like, a weakness on the surface because it's like, you know, you don't have the strength to just be your own person. You're just blending in with all these people. But you're just, you know, trying to follow the crowd, being a sheep, okay? Whereas rebelling seems like I'm strong, I'm gonna rebel, I'm gonna be different, right? But sometimes, you know, if you don't know how to blend in and you're too different and you create too much of a fuss, it could create problems too. It depends on the situation, right? If you're always the one raising your hand at work and trying to protest things or trying to do things differently or trying to buck the system, it could create a lot of heartache for you, you know, and that's not always a strength. It's not always seen as something that's helpful. Sometimes just knowing how to blend in when it's appropriate could actually be a strength because you're looking out for cues in other people. You're figuring out how to get along with them, how to blend in with the system, and that could actually help a lot, you know, especially in like a work environment or even certain social environments. Okay. All right. And finally, doing things yourself or being independent versus getting help or being, let's say, interdependent. Okay. Sometimes it's dependent, like getting too dependent on people, but we'll say interdependent because that's kind of working with people, helping each other. Okay. So a lot of times, especially in American culture, we have a very independent mindset, right? Fierce independence, American independence. But sometimes if you're afraid to get help and you do things by yourself too much because you don't want to let other people in, that could be a weakness because we don't know how to do everything ourselves, right? Being independent sometimes could be a strength because, you know, I'm figuring out on my own, but not realizing when we need help and trying to do it all the time isn't always the best, especially in recovery. We need people to help us in recovery. If we figured out how to do it ourselves, we would have been better already, right? We definitely need other people. And it takes strength again to be vulnerable, okay? To be able to allow the help, okay? Getting help could be seen as a weakness if you're too dependent and you're not willing to try things yourself and you're afraid to think for yourself and, you know, you're constantly soliciting the help of other people. So it's important to have kind of a balance between the two, all right? But again, allowing yourself to be vulnerable to get help can also be a strength. All right, so these are just some examples, okay? But see how this works? It's important to like reevaluate different things in your life and not judge yourself too strongly because what could seem like a strength could be a weakness and what could seem like a weakness could be a strength. So try to find your strengths where they are, especially if they're hidden, and capitalize on them the best you can. Okay? All right, thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you soon.